Hello, my dear friend. Today, I'm going to share my life story with you. My name is James Carter. I am 27 years old, and I live in Detroit, Michigan. My life has never been easy. I come from a very poor family, and I have faced more struggles than I can count. But I never gave up. I kept fighting, and today I want to tell you how I survived, how I suffered, and how I fought my way through life. I work as an auto mechanic in a small repair shop in downtown Detroit. I spend my days fixing cars, changing tires, and doing whatever I can to earn enough money to survive. It's not a glamorous job, but it puts food on my table. I live in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a not-so-good neighborhood, where sirens are a common sound at night, and crime is just around the corner. But that's life. And this is my story. The beginning of my struggles. I was born in 1997 in one of the poorest areas of Detroit. My family never had much. My father, David Carter, worked as a construction worker, but he never had a stable job. Some weeks he worked, some weeks he didn't. My mother, Linda Carter, was a housewife. She tried her best to take care of me and my two younger sisters, Emily and Sophia. Life was always tough. We lived in a small, broken-down house with old furniture, a leaking roof, and a heater that barely worked in the cold Michigan winters. I remember nights when we had no food, and my mother would give us her portion so we wouldn't sleep hungry. My father, though a hard-working man, sometimes found escape in alcohol. It was his way of dealing with stress, but it made things worse. School was never easy for me. I studied at Mumford High School, but I was never the smartest kid in class. Not because I wasn't intelligent, but because I was too busy worrying about real-life problems. I couldn't focus on homework when my stomach was empty. I couldn't concentrate in class when I was thinking about how my mother would manage rent. Despite everything, I always believed in one thing: I had to survive. The teenage years, learning to fight. By the time I was 14, I started working part-time. I knew I couldn't depend on my father's unstable income. My first job was at a small grocery store in Greektown, a well-known part of Detroit. I stocked shelves, cleaned floors, and sometimes delivered groceries to nearby houses. The pay was low, just $5 per hour, but at least I could buy food for my sisters. But working while studying was never easy. I often fell asleep in class because I was too exhausted. My teachers thought I was lazy, but they didn't know that I was up at 5 a.m. working before school. They didn't know that I had to choose between studying and helping my family. At 16, I found another job at a car repair shop. That's where my real passion for fixing cars started. I loved working with my hands, understanding how engines worked, and seeing a broken-down car come back to life. The owner, Mr. Thompson, was a kind old man who taught me everything he knew. But no matter how much I worked, the money was never enough. The hardest times. When I turned 18, my father lost his job completely. His drinking got worse, and soon he stopped coming home. My mother was devastated, but she had no choice but to take up work as a cleaner in a downtown office building. Even then, we struggled to pay rent. I knew I had to do something, so I dropped out of high school. I never wanted to, but I had no choice. My sisters needed food. My mother needed help. I started working full-time at the auto shop, earning around $400 a week. It was still not enough. There were nights when we had no electricity because we couldn't pay the bill. Winters were the worst because the heating would get cut off. I remember one winter when it was -10 degrees outside, and we had to use blankets and candles to keep warm. I had moments of frustration, moments when I wanted to give up. I saw kids my age going to college, having fun, living normal lives. And then there was me, working long hours, struggling just to keep my family alive. Finding a way out. One day, when I was 22, I met a man named Michael Anderson. He was a regular customer at the auto shop and always brought his luxury cars for servicing. He was a successful businessman, but unlike others, he didn't look down on me. One day he asked me, "James, why are you working here? You're smart. You can do more." I laughed and said, "This is all I know." He shook his head and said, "You have potential. You should think about starting your own business." I had never thought about it. Me? Owning a business? It sounded impossible. But that conversation stayed in my mind. For the next few months, I started learning everything I could about auto repairs and customer service. I saved every extra dollar I earned. At 25, I finally took a risk. I rented a small garage in a cheaper part of town and started my own auto repair shop. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I worked 14-hour days, fixing cars, handling customers, and slowly building a name for myself. At first, business was slow, but word spread. People liked my work. They trusted me, and slowly, things changed. The Journey of James Carter. Part 2. Life doesn't change overnight. Even though I had my own auto repair shop now, I still woke up every day at 5 a.m., ready to fight for every dollar. Owning a business was different from working for someone else. Before, I just had to fix cars and get paid. Now, I had to manage rent, electricity bills, tools, customer complaints, and so many other things I had never thought about before. Some months were good. I made enough to pay my bills, buy groceries, and even save a little. But some months were terrible. If I didn't get enough customers, I had to choose between paying rent for my garage or keeping the lights on at home. There were nights when I sat alone in my small office, staring at my bank balance, wondering if I had made a mistake. Maybe I should have just stayed at the old shop, I thought. Maybe I'm not smart enough to run a business. But then I remembered where I came from. I had survived hunger, cold winters, and an absent father. I had worked for pennies just to feed my sisters. If I could survive that, I could survive this too. The first big challenge. One day, about 6 months after opening my shop, something happened that almost broke me. It was a normal morning. I had just opened my garage when I noticed something was wrong. The lock on the front gate was broken. My stomach dropped. I rushed inside. My worst fear came true. Someone had broken in. My toolbox was gone. My air compressor, my tire machine, my best wrenches, everything that I needed to work had been stolen. It was at least $8,000 worth of tools. For a big company, that's nothing. But for me, that was everything. I fell to my knees. How am I supposed to work now? I whispered to myself. I called the police, but in a city like Detroit, break-ins were common. The officers took my report, nodded, and said, "We'll see what we can do." I knew what that meant. I would probably never see my tools again. For the next few days, I felt completely lost. Customers came, but I had nothing to fix their cars with. I had to turn them away. I had no money to buy new tools. My business was dying before it had even begun. That night, I sat in my garage alone. The lights were off to save electricity. I held my head in my hands, thinking about all the years I had struggled. And then, something hit me. I had come too far to give up now. The comeback, I had to find a way to get back up. I remembered my old boss, Mr. Thompson, the man who had taught me everything about cars. I hadn't seen him in a while, but I decided to visit his shop the next morning. When I walked in, he smiled. "James, how's the business?" I sighed. "Not good, sir. Someone stole all my tools." His face changed. He rubbed his chin and nodded. Then, without saying a word, he walked to the back of his shop and came back with an old toolbox. "Take these," he said. "They're not new, but they'll get you back on your feet." I stared at him in shock. "I can't take this, sir. You need them." He shook his head. "I've been in this business for 40 years, kid. I've seen tough times. I know what you're feeling right now. Just promise me one thing. One day, when you're successful, help someone else the way I'm helping you." I almost cried. I thanked him 100 times and left with the toolbox. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started again. Slowly, I started working again. I didn't have all my fancy tools, but I had my hands, my knowledge, and my determination. Customers came back, money started coming in again, and within a few months, I had saved enough to buy back most of the tools I had lost. Family comes. First, even as my business started growing again, I never forgot why I was doing all this. For my family. My mother, Linda, was still working as a cleaner, and I hated seeing her struggle. She had spent her entire life taking care of us, sacrificing her own dreams. One day, I sat her down and said, "Mom, I don't want you to work anymore." She frowned. "James, I can't just sit at home and do nothing." I smiled. "You don't have to. You can help me with the business. I need someone to handle customer calls, appointments, and paperwork. It's not hard work, but it's important. And I'd rather have you in the shop than scrubbing floors for strangers." Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. And just like that, my mother became my first employee. As for my sisters, Emily and Sophia, I made sure they never had to drop out of school the way I did. I paid for their books, their school fees, and whatever they needed. I wanted them to have a future better than mine. Success, but not the end. Now, at 27, I can say that life is better. My shop, Carter Auto Repairs, is no longer just a small garage. It's a well-known place in my neighborhood. I have 4 employees, including my mother, and I even hired a young mechanic who reminds me of myself when I was starting out. I make enough money to live comfortably, not luxuriously, but comfortably. I don't worry about food anymore. I don't worry about rent. And for the first time in my life, I feel free. But success doesn't mean I forget my past. I still remember the hunger, the cold winters, the nights I thought I wouldn't make it. That's why I always help young boys who come into my shop looking for work. I know what it's like to be them. I know what it's like to struggle. And like Mr. Thompson helped me, I want to help them. The next chapter of my life. Life is strange. One moment, you're struggling to survive, and the next, you're living the life you once prayed for. But even when you reach a better place, life always has new lessons to teach. After my business started running smoothly, I thought my struggles were over. I had money to support my mother and sisters. I had a name in my neighborhood. People respected me. But success comes with its own challenges, new fears, new responsibilities, and new tests. One of the biggest struggles I faced after rebuilding my business was trusting people. Betrayal from a friend. I had always been careful about who I let into my life, but as my garage became more successful, more people started coming around. Some wanted jobs, some wanted advice, and some just wanted a piece of my success. One of them was Ryan, a guy I had known from high school. Back then, he was like me, poor, always trying to make ends meet. We weren't best friends, but we understood each other. One day, he walked into my garage. He looked rough. His clothes were dirty, and he had that hungry look in his eyes that I knew all too well. "James, man, I need work," he said. "Anything. I'll do whatever you need." I didn't even think twice. I knew what it was like to be desperate, to need just one chance. So, I hired him. At first, Ryan was a great worker. He came early, stayed late, and worked hard. I trusted him. I even started giving him extra responsibilities, handling cash payments, ordering parts, talking to customers. But then, small things started happening. One day, a customer told me he had paid for a repair, but when I checked my records, there was no payment recorded. Another time, a shipment of car parts went missing. And then, money started disappearing from the register. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Ryan was like me. He knew the struggle. Why would he steal from me? But deep down, I knew. One night, I stayed late at the shop and checked the security cameras. What I saw broke me. Ryan was stealing from me, taking cash, pocketing it, acting like nothing happened. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and betrayal. I had given him a chance, just like Mr. Thompson had given me one. And this is how he repaid me? The next morning, I confronted him. "Ryan, I know what you've been doing." His face turned pale. "James, I swear, it's not what you think. Don't lie to me." He sighed and looked down. "I needed the money, man. I was struggling. I was gonna pay you back." I clenched my fists. "You could have asked me for help, but instead you stole from me." He had no answer. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to yell. But instead, I did something that shocked even myself. I let him go. "Take whatever you stole and leave. Don't ever come back." He didn't argue. He just left. And that was the last time I saw him. That day, I learned one of the hardest lessons of my life. Not everyone who struggles with you will be loyal to you. Love and sacrifice. After the betrayal, I became more careful. I worked even harder. My business grew. But there was one thing missing in my life: love. I was so focused on surviving that I had never thought about relationships. I had been on dates before, but nothing serious. Then, I met Sophia Richardson. She came into my shop one rainy afternoon with a flat tire. She wasn't like the usual customers. She had this energy, this confidence that made her stand out. "How long will it take?" she asked, crossing her arms. I chuckled. "Not long if you stop rushing me." She smirked. "All right, Mr. Mechanic, let's see if you're as good as they say." That was how it started. After that day, she kept coming back. Not because her car had problems, but because we enjoyed talking. She was different from me. She came from a good family, had a stable job as a nurse, and never had to worry about money the way I did. But she never judged me for my past. Instead, she admired my struggle. One evening, as we sat in my garage after I closed up, she said something that stuck with me forever. "James, you work so hard for everyone, your mom, your sisters, your employees, but when will you work for yourself?" I laughed. "What do you mean?" She held my hand. "I mean, you deserve happiness too. You deserve to dream beyond just surviving." No one had ever said that to me before. For so long, I had been stuck in survival mode, always thinking about how to keep the business running, how to support my family. I never thought about what I wanted. That night, I realized something. I wanted a future with her. Building a new life. Sophia and I became serious. She supported me in ways I never knew I needed. She helped me organize my business, manage my finances, and even pushed me to expand. "You're too good to stay small," she said. With her encouragement, I took a big step. I opened a second garage in another part of Detroit. It was a risk, but it paid off. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just a poor boy struggling to survive. I was a businessman, a boss, a man building a future. A new chapter. Challenges of success. Life doesn't stop testing you just because you've made it out of poverty. In fact, the more you climb, the harder the challenges become. I learned this the moment I expanded my business. With the second garage up and running, I finally felt like I was stepping into a life I had only dreamed of. But success comes with new responsibilities, new enemies, and new fears. The weight of expectations. Owning one garage was already tough, but two? That was a whole different game. The second garage was on the east side of Detroit, in a rougher neighborhood. I thought I understood struggle, but running a business there was different. Customers were harder to please, competition was fierce, and the crime rate made everything 10 times harder. One night, I got a call from my manager. "James, we got a problem." My heart sank. What happened? "Someone broke in. They stole tools, damaged some cars. It's bad." I drove there immediately. When I saw the damage, my stomach twisted. Thousands of dollars gone overnight. It was a punch to the gut. I worked too hard for this. I couldn't let it fall apart. I increased security, added cameras, and even hired a night guard. But deep down, I knew something. Success makes you a target. People see what you have and either want to take it or destroy it. A friend turned rival. While I was handling the robbery, another problem was brewing: competition. Remember how I used to struggle to get customers when I first started? Now I was on the other side of that. Some older mechanics in the area didn't like me stepping in. They saw me as an outsider. One of them was Marcus Green, a guy who had been in the business for over 20 years. He had a well-known garage, but when mine opened, customers started coming to me instead. At first, he was just cold toward me, ignoring me at car shows, avoiding eye contact. But then, things turned ugly. One day, one of my mechanics came to me looking nervous. "Boss, you need to see this." He showed me a flyer. It was from Marcus's garage, and on it was a fake story about me, saying I used cheap parts, overcharged customers, and even lied about my experience. I was furious. I wanted to confront him, to make him stop. But Sophia stopped me. "James, don't fight him. Let your work speak for itself." She was right. Instead of fighting back, I focused on being better. I ran promotions, treated my customers well, and proved that I was the best. And guess what? People saw through the lies. Customers kept coming. And Marcus? His business started struggling because his bitterness was driving people away. That was another lesson. You don't have to fight every battle. Sometimes, success is the best revenge. Love and marriage, a different kind of challenge. While my business was growing, so was my relationship with Sophia. We had been together for 2 years, and I knew she was the one. One evening, as we walked along the Detroit Riverwalk, I pulled out a ring. "Sophia, I've spent my life fighting to survive. But with you, I don't want to just survive. I want to live. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes, James. 1,000 times yes." It was one of the happiest moments of my life. But marriage, it's not a fairy tale. The first year was hard. Balancing my growing business with my new life as a husband wasn't easy. There were days I worked too late, nights I was too tired to talk, and times when I brought my stress home. Sophia was patient, but one night, she broke down. "James, I love you, but I need you too. Not just as a provider, but as my husband." It hit me hard. I had spent so many years focusing on survival that I didn't know how to slow down and enjoy life. So I made changes. I started taking Sundays off, making time for dates, and reminding myself that money isn't everything. Love needs attention too. Giving back. The final lesson. One day, I was sitting in my office when I saw a boy outside my garage. Dirty clothes, empty eyes. He reminded me of myself at that age. I walked out and asked, "What's your name?" "Malik," he mumbled. "What are you doing here?" "Just looking." I saw the hunger in his eyes, not for food, but for hope. So I made a decision. "You want to learn?" His eyes widened. "Really?" I gave him a job, not as a mechanic, but as an assistant. He cleaned, watched, and slowly learned. And you know what? Malik became one of the best mechanics I ever trained. That's when I realized success isn't just about what you earn. It's about what you give back. Where I am now today, I own 4 garages across Detroit. My mother lives in a house I bought for her. My sisters went to college. And Sophia? We just had our first child, a boy named Nathan. Looking at my life now, I still can't believe how far I've come. From a hungry kid on the streets to a husband, father, and businessman. I made it, but the journey never stops. A legacy in the making life is never about standing still. The moment you think you've made it, life finds a way to remind you that there's always more to do. Owning 4 garages, having a beautiful wife, and holding my newborn son in my arms should have felt like the perfect ending to my story. But I quickly realized something. Success isn't just about what you build, it's about what you leave behind. Raising a son while running a business. Being a father was a whole new kind of challenge. I remember the first night we brought Nathan home. I was exhausted from work, thinking I'd get a few hours of sleep before heading back to the garage in the morning. But as soon as I laid down, he started crying. Sophia was just as tired as I was, but she got up without a complaint. I watched her hold him, rock him gently, and whisper, "Shh, baby, Daddy's tired." I felt guilty. Here I was, a man who had fought so hard to have a family, yet I was letting my work take me away from them. So I made a decision. I started spending more time at home. It wasn't easy. I had employees, customers, and responsibilities. But I learned to delegate, trust my managers, and step back when needed. Because at the end of the day, what's the point of success if you can't enjoy it with the people you love? Expanding beyond the garage. As Nathan grew, so did my vision. One evening, while playing with him in the living room, I looked around and thought about the kids growing up the way I did, hungry, cold, and hopeless. I knew what it felt like to be that boy, and I couldn't just sit back and watch it happen to others. That's when the idea hit me. I needed to give back, not just by hiring young mechanics, but by creating real opportunities for kids with no hope. I sat Sophia down and told her my plan. I want to open a training school for kids who come from struggling backgrounds, teach them skills, help them build a future. She smiled. "James, that's the best thing you could do." Building the next generation. I invested in an old warehouse near my first garage, the place where my journey started. I turned it into a training center for young men and women who wanted to learn a trade but had no way to afford school. At first, only a few kids showed up, mostly local teenagers who had dropped out of high school. But word spread fast. Soon, I had dozens of students, some even coming from other cities just to learn. One of them, a boy named Terrence, reminded me a lot of myself. He showed up one morning wearing torn sneakers and a hoodie that barely fit him. He had that same look in his eyes, hunger for something more. "Why do you want to learn this?" I asked him. He hesitated before answering. "Because I don't want to end up like my father." I didn't need to ask more. I knew what he meant. His father was probably like mine, either absent or struggling with his own demons. I made it my mission to teach him everything I knew, not just about cars, but about life. Within a year, Terrence became one of my best students. I even gave him a job at my second garage. And seeing him succeed reminded me why I started all this in the first place. The struggles never stop. Even with success, challenges kept coming. One of my biggest fears became real. The economy started to slow down, and business took a hit. Customers weren't spending as much, and I had to make some tough decisions. For the first time in years, I faced something I hadn't dealt with in a long time: the fear of losing everything. One night, I sat alone in my office, staring at the numbers. If things didn't turn around, I'd have to close one of the garages. I felt like I was back at square one. But Sophia reminded me of something. James, you built this from nothing. You didn't give up when you had no money, no connections, and no help. You're not going to give up now. She was right. I went back to what made me successful in the first place: hard work, smart decisions, and treating people right. Instead of cutting back, I got creative. I started offering mobile repair services, where mechanics would go directly to customers' homes. I partnered with local businesses to offer maintenance deals for company vehicles. I used social media to attract younger customers who wanted affordable repairs. And slowly, business started picking up again. It was a reminder that no matter how far you've come, you're never immune to failure. But what matters is how you respond to it. Looking back, moving forward. Today, I'm not just James Carter, the poor boy from Detroit. I'm a husband, a father, a business owner, and a mentor. I look at Nathan, now 5 years old, and I think about the life he'll have, the opportunities, the security, the love, and I realize something. I didn't just escape poverty, I broke the cycle. My son will never know the pain of going to bed hungry. He'll never have to work in freezing cold just to survive. He'll never have to wonder if he's good enough. But he'll also learn what it means to work hard, appreciate what he has, and give back to others. Because at the end of the day, success isn't just about making money. It's about leaving something behind that's bigger than yourself. And that's the legacy I'm building. One garage, one student, and one dream at a time. A legacy that keeps growing. Life never really slows down. Just when you think you've reached a comfortable place, a new challenge appears. Owning 4 garages, running a training center, and raising a family was already a lot. But deep down, I knew I wasn't done yet. Because success isn't just about how much you earn. It's about how much impact you leave behind. Teaching Nathan the value of hard work. Nathan was growing fast. At 6 years old, he was already curious about what I did. One evening, he walked into the garage while I was working on an old Mustang. He stood there, watching me carefully, his little hands resting on the hood. "Dad, what are you doing?" I smiled. "Fixing an engine, buddy." He tilted his head. "Can I help?" Most parents might have said, "You're too young," but I saw an opportunity. I handed him a small wrench. "Okay, you see this bolt? Try turning it." He struggled, his tiny hands gripping the tool, his face scrunched in determination. After a few seconds, he looked up at me, frustrated. "It's too hard." I kneeled beside him and said something my old mentor once told me. "Nothing worth having comes easy. You just have to keep trying." Nathan nodded and kept working. That day, he didn't fix the car, but he learned something even more valuable: persistence. Expanding the training center. My training center had started small, but now kids were coming from all over Detroit. One day, I got a call from an old friend, Marcus, who ran a similar program in Chicago. "James, I heard about what you're doing. How would you feel about expanding?" At first, I hesitated. Expanding meant more responsibility, more risks. But then I thought about all the kids who needed this opportunity. I met with Marcus, and we came up with a plan. We would open a second training center in Chicago, giving more young people a chance to learn and grow. Sophia was my biggest supporter. James, this is your calling. You were never meant to just fix cars, you were meant to fix lives. So, I took the leap. The new center launched with 50 students, and within months, the numbers grew. Watching these young men and women find purpose reminded me why I started all this in the first place. Challenges never stop. Of course, success didn't mean things got easier. Running multiple businesses meant dealing with financial stress, employee issues, and unexpected problems. One morning, my manager at the first garage called me in a panic. "Boss, the landlord is selling the building. We might lose the shop." That garage was where it all started. I couldn't let it go. I had two choices: find a new location and start over, buy the building and secure our future. The problem? Buying it meant taking a huge financial risk. I sat down with Sophia, running through the numbers. If I bought the building, I'd have to invest most of our savings. I asked myself, what would the old James do? He wouldn't have hesitated. He would have taken the risk. So I made the decision. I bought the building. It was the scariest financial move of my life, but it was also the best one. Because now, no one could take that shop away from me. Giving back to the community. With the businesses running smoothly, I finally had time to do something I'd always wanted: give back to the neighborhood that raised me. I started a scholarship program for kids who wanted to go to trade school but couldn't afford it. We called it the Carter Opportunity Fund. Every year we'd sponsor 5 students, covering their tuition and giving them internships at our garages. The first student we sponsored was Luis, a young man from Southwest Detroit. He reminded me of myself, hungry, determined, but lost. When I handed him his scholarship letter, he broke down in tears. "I never thought I'd get a chance like this." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Someone gave me a chance once. Now it's your turn." Family first. Despite all the success, I never forgot what mattered most: family. One night, as I was tucking Nathan into bed, he looked up at me and asked, "Dad, are you proud of me?" I felt my heart squeeze. I cupped his face and said, "Nathan, I'll always be proud of you. Not because of what you do, but because of who you are." I had spent so many years proving myself to the world, but in that moment, I realized something. Success isn't about wealth or fame. It's about the lives you touch and the people you love. The journey never ends. Today, I look around and see everything I've built: the garages, the training centers, the scholarship program. I see young men and women learning skills that will change their futures. I see my wife, my son, my employees, and my students, all part of something bigger than just a business. And I know this is just the beginning, because no matter how much success you achieve, there's always more good to do in the world. And I'm not done yet.